Yo,
Yeah.
what's that?
Well, I just got out of a really hectic situation
What happened? Is it appropriate for YouTube Live, or do we need to discuss this afterwards?
afterwards.
Damn, you got everybody curious now, bro.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, but this no, nothing too crazy. But yeah, it was unexpected. Life is throwing unexpected things at me right now.
That's how it goes. I love it. I'm curious. Okay, guys, live stream over. I've got to go talk to Matt. Yeah, it's a bit quiet at the moment. I'm glad you joined. I was struggling to keep it going. I needed some
Has
help.
there been questions? Has there been questions or not?
No one's here yet. Well, now there's three people, but before you got here, it was pretty much me turning to myself. Nothing new. That's how the videos go.
I think
Let me
you're comfortable with yourself, just being.
right. So what's it like in Amsterdam at the moment?
It's been good. Weather not so good last few days, but last weekend it was really good. Like
Oh yeah,
I was feeling the summer, yeah. Just chilling in the park again and really nice.
nice. So the winter is mostly over.
Yeah, spring now, and yeah. So April, we have King's Day at the end of April. I don't know
Okay.
if you know
Nah.
the it's a
What's that?
special day. It's our like national holiday where
Oh,
everybody
see.
wears orange and like the streets are full, absolutely packed.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, it's
Everyone
really
in their cross shirts.
sorry.
Everybody in their cross shirts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You you brought one from your brother, right? For your brother when you were here, or
What was
Gullit.
it? I think it was a hullet. Yeah,
Yeah, Gullit.
hullet. Yeah, I'm still waiting for my Ajax shirt.
Yeah, I have shirt. Yeah.
I got a watch charger.
Oh yeah, totally forgot about
I bought a new one.
it. Yeah, shipping is really expensive. I think.
Yeah, I think it's cheaper to buy one here.
Yeah,
Nice. Well, Fionn, thank you for the mic check. If
yeah.
anybody, there's three people, it says. If anybody has any questions or topics of conversation, please feel free to share. If you have anything you want to share with the people, Matt.
Mm, yeah, I think I keep coming back to the importance of like regular practice meditation.
Yeah,
Like for myself, in the last 1 2 weeks, I think I really got back into like a daily practice. Like when I was traveling, it was just not really. I did do something in the morning, something in the evening, maybe, but often I would just like halfway through, I was just like, ah man, like the day is waiting for me. Like I'm just gonna go out,
mm,
and just restless,
yeah,
and here it's better for me. Like for now, I can. It's more calm. I can sit in the morning for half an hour,
mm,
and in the evening, and during the day. Sometimes it's a game changer, absolutely.
mm, right,
And
yeah,
with some people I've already chatted with, I think, yeah. I mean, there's quite some resistance to starting like meditating more, also
yeah,
for me right now. But it's the way to go. It's
yeah, yeah.
that's
It
just
clarifies things so much quicker than you just get caught up in the
mm,
mind, and things are just more. There's more problems, and then when you sit enough, it just clarifies that. I feel like
yeah.
um, so many of the things that felt like big problems to solve, it's just like, oh wait, that was just a whole bunch of thoughts, something like that.
Mm.
But yeah, I feel like what you say about resistance to that, it's so natural. For me, what helped a
Yeah.
lot with that was like a mini retreat, like the first retreat I ever did. It was like it shattered those beliefs around how long I could sit for, and then from then it was so much easier to carry that daily. So I guess for anybody who's struggling with that, that's a cool thing to explore. Is if you have access to any kind of retreat or something, it's worth it.
Mm. Yeah, and for me still, I still there's still a lot of resistance for me to sit longer and more, and but every time I do it, I never regret it.
Yeah,
It,
yeah,
it
exactly. And it often just like I also like it's funny when you get busy again, you kind of play around with those kinds of things. Um, but there is a big difference I find between sitting for like 20 minutes consistently and sitting for like half an hour and 40 minutes. It's like it just really gives you time to go deeper, and
mm,
you can come into contact with stuff that you can sit 20 minutes pretty consistently, and it's still very helpful. Like again, if somebody is, don't let that put you off. Like I often do that. I just sit like 10 minutes, especially when I'm busy. But if you
mm,
have time and you're curious, it's definitely worth it. And also something about the like compound effect of it. Like that's what I notice. Whenever I get into like a good rhythm of like sitting quite a bit each day, you just kind of drop in a little bit easier every single time because it's like those uh, that kind of concentration, you could say, or that presence is just carrying over.
mm,
So it's definitely worth like a daily routine. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this is what happens when you don't schedule a live stream.
We can do some. We can do some meditation.
Meditation. I like it. So, what's your kind of favorite inquiry or pointer to lead you?
Like it switches a lot. In the beginning, was a lot of who am I or where am I, um, and I had like a period of moo, a lot of where
Yeah,
like, and moo is still is very helpful for me when it's like very chaotic in the mind or very busy.
yeah,
Then it's like okay, just stay with moo or something,
yeah,
and because even like who am I, you can still get like it's not as sturdy, I think, as moo or something.
mm.
I don't know if it's the
Yeah,
correct word.
yeah. It's good. I agree that Moo is just so there's no conceptual answer, right? So you can't really like feed it with anything. Um, and yeah, I often come back to it as well, like just as like a point, like to bring the mind to like a point. Moo.
Mm,
I also love um, like exploring the I sense. So like who is sitting here doing this practice,
mm,
and then noticing the sense of I. But like I found this such a big step for me at one point was like, okay, you get familiar with the sense of I at some point, but then you realize if you drop the label I, that sense is so mysterious. Like there's so much like mystery and depth to it, but you were just like, oh, okay, that's the I sense. That's what they're talking about. That's the being sense or whatever. Which like, what is it now if I drop the label I? If I drop any label, awareness, me, being, and then like you realize how there's there's no way to grasp it in essence.
mm,
Like Angela has a good video on this, I think, the awareness trap, and Frank Yang has spoken about it as well. And at some point for me, that just it really took things a layer deeper because it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do inquiry to lead me to the I sense, but then the mind is like, oh, that's the I sense. Oh, it can think about it, it can label it, and then it's like, wait, what is the I sense without the label I anymore?
mm.
and then there's just yeah.
Yeah,
There-
this is also a really good point for me. Just this, just saying like this, like
mm,
what
mm, yeah,
I just say this, and then I feel something. This, like,
yeah. And then what is that? Like, yeah, exactly. Like, what is this? And then what is it without the label this? Just as
yeah,
experience. Like really, can you just go into your own direct experience?
mm, I'm following along.
And then that's it. I mean,
Yeah, I also had it like I was talking with some stuff, and then I was talking about it, and then at one point I was thinking like, am I making sense to the other person? And then I just said it to them like very direct. So like, do you feel this, like here? And they were
yeah,
like, yeah, yeah. And it was like the first time they felt like this. It was like such a
yeah,
cool moment because like
that's amazing.
like a day before it would seem like a very weird conversation, like just
Yeah,
asking
yeah,
someone, do you feel this? And then they
yeah,
resonate with it, you know.
yeah. That's amazing. When someone can feel into it, it's like it's
Yeah,
so cool. But it is such a good pointer, right? Like I remember discussing this with a friend, and I was like, "This, like what the fuck is this?"
yeah,
Like you don't even need to like get into any philosophical uh, points, really. It's just like this exact happening right now. If you drop all the narrative, like that's another point I'd love to do. It's like if you drop all the narrative, you're sitting there, and like, what if I can't apply a narrative? I actually like to do this like wherever I'm at. Like let's say I'm at the gym and I'm taking a rest between sets and I'm just sitting there. And then I'm like, eyes closed, like, what if I drop the whole narrative saying right now I'm at the gym and and it's like you can touch into it at any point, and it's yeah, you
mm,
just realize that it's all narrative, I suppose.
yeah. And then often I get caught up in thoughts like, why don't I recognize this more often, or why don't I drop more?
Mm.
Like every time I do drop into it, I'm like, man, I'm so many hours of the day go by where I don't drop into this.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you
I
have to
guess
question
that's then you
what,
have to watch Angela.
yeah, what thoughts you're getting onto, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. And I feel like that goes back to what you said at the beginning about um, spending enough time, letting it deepen, and then it just becomes more accessible. Something that was really helpful for me was uh, not putting too much expectation on being having to be in that space all the time. Like that actually creates more struggle. Just from my own experience, I found like it's natural, obviously, in when things get busy for that to fall into the background, like less obvious, and then it's just like, can we keep touching into it when we have the time, but also let go into the flow of like whatever's happening. I often would realize my mind was turning the moment into a struggle by expecting to be in this kind of presence, when you're in a dynamic situation. And that comes like you can learn to let go more and more in those situations. But often I found actually that feeling of trying to turn the moment into something is actually an escape of letting go into the uncontrollable dynamicness of the situation. Like in a conversation with somebody, trying to hold back and find a ground basically for the mind to perceive from, rather than letting go into the kind of vulnerability of not knowing and like just responding. That was something that was helpful for me, was realizing that the mind was trying to create a kind of a ground of something, and then um, you just eventually you just lean into every single moment as it is. Um, that was helpful because otherwise there's expectation, right? Like that, oh, I should be in this state or I should be in that state. But that's actually that's what's distancing us from finding the presence of that state, is like busy, that the mind that's analyzing what should be happening as opposed to what is happening. But it is helpful to practice more. Like that's, I come back to that all the time. Things are just clearer then. But at the same time, there's the value of the uncontrollable dynamicness of busy living. Like it's that balance of integration, right? Because you can get very comfortable in silence, and that's great. And then the integration will always bring up what needs to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marvin Sliani says, in Vedic tradition, it says, you are that. You are that.
Yeah, I think there's like a popular book, I think, which is called I Am That. I think.
Yeah, by Nisargadatta.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love actually Jayasara. Do you know Jayasara, Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got some kind of readings of Nisargadatta's pointers, and some of them that are really, really nice. Like one that talks about going beyond the I am sense. That's kind of touches on what I was talking about earlier, where it's like, okay, you find the I am sense, and then you keep on touching into it until you drop the label I am, and you drop the label that, and it's just an experience, I guess is one way to put it. But it's an experience. So like another way to talk about it is Angelo. One of his pointers that I really like is knowing with no object of knowing. So because so quickly the mind creates an object. So quickly the mind will be like, oh, I'm noticing this, and then it's like, okay, but can I rest back into that, which is noticing that, and not reform it into something. But that's where inquiry is kind of necessary if somebody doesn't have a taste of that, right? Because obviously now we're talking once you've got a taste of this experience. But I'm just thinking if somebody's listening to this and then they're like, well, how do I rest into this knowing with no object of knowing? That's where something like, well, where am I aware of that thought from? Where am I? There's a thought. Where am I aware of that from? Like right now, where is the perceiver? And then you just keep touching back into that space. And then you just notice. Yeah, and you just notice when the mind forms something like what is this? What is that? And it's like, oh, okay, that's just a bit of movement of the mind. But what I mean, if you really think about it, like it's so strange that like we never question this, because where the fuck are thoughts even happening? like I think like on before you start up this investigation, it's like we're referencing these thoughts all the time. This thought saying this, we're referencing this thing called the mind. But like, where is that experience even happening? Like that's such an easy entry point, I suppose. It's like go to the thinking space, and it's like, where does that take you? There's only, the mind will get rustled up by this initially, and it'll be like, what's the thinking space? Where is that? And it's like that's it. Those are the thoughts right there. Where are they coming from? And it's just a kind of smoothing out sort of the thought stuff, if that makes sense. Like as you touch into it more, it just stop. It's like all of these big objects just smooth out, and then there's something. Yeah. Don't know how that lands. If anybody has any questions, feel free. Or if you want more pointing. And another one I really like actually is Locke Kelly. Did you ever use any of Locke's pointers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like one that says, what is this? I think it's something like this. Like, what's here when there's no problem to solve?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then,
no,
yeah,
mm,
and you just keep dropping that in. Like, what's here when there's no problem to solve? And then you just see when the mind starts trying to turn that into a problem. Like, I don't know what's here when there's no problem to solve. Well, but this is a problem. And then it's like, but what if there was no problem to solve? Like, what is left? It's such a good way to stop the mind.
mm.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Track says how to start meditating. That's a good question. Okay, let me give my answer and then we can see what Matt says. How to start meditating? I mean, I use the Waking Up app from Sam Harris. There's a nice introductory course with a bunch of different pointers that kind of get progressively deeper. Starts to talk about some of the stuff we're talking about here, like more inquiry into the sense of self. But it starts with some good, like mindfulness practice, right? Because you do need a level of mindfulness. Otherwise, you just get too caught up in the thoughts. So I use that and other courses on that app I particularly found helpful. Then eventually I did also start doing a lot more just concentration meditation. But yeah, if you're like a ranked beginner, I would say the app is really helpful because there's guided meditations. And guided meditations are very nice when you're really new, just to kind of keep pointing you back into your points of focus, if that makes sense. You know, you could also just set like a 10-minute timer and follow the breath, right? And it's really helpful because you can see when your mind wanders. Or you at first you don't see when your mind wanders, but then you eventually see how caught up you were in thoughts. And a good resource as well is The Mind Illuminated. I eventually used that book quite a lot to develop like a consistent, deep practice. And it's a really good beginner book because it also lines up all the mistakes of, like the obstacles that beginners come into. So those are some ideas. Yeah, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I haven't read The Mind Illuminated. I did do the introductory course. I really recommend that. And besides that, I would just say, yeah, just go sit with your eyes closed, and experience what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
Like maybe I mean it gets so close to you during this when you're dealing with this. I mean, you get so many symptoms and sensations in your chest and belly, for example, that you can
Mm,
just, without much knowledge of meditation, you can just sit with those sensations, try to feel the
yeah.
sensation, and that's a great way in. And of course, as you say, you need some mindfulness because otherwise you will jump to the thoughts really quickly. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's, I mean, it's the basics is not hard. Just close your eyes and
Mm,
feel what you're feeling, hear what you're hearing. Um,
yeah.
you can go all the senses, but I like feeling a lot, and I
Yeah.
like feeling.
Specifically, yeah. Specifically when there's so much. It's the same when I was talking with Josh. That was one of the points he made. It's like when you've got chronic pain or chronic symptoms, it's like there's something there all the time. That's a kind of pay attention experience. Um, but yeah, I will add to that. Like, set a timer as well. Just like for a beginner, I feel like that's really, and I still find it really helpful. Just so you know when your mind starts thinking, it's like, oh wait, the timer hasn't gone off yet. Let me keep paying attention. You know, um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I do find like, yeah, you mean you can just start anyway, but then you will probably get caught up in mind wandering and frustration and all of that, and just know that that's all normal. And but yeah, pointers can be really helpful early on, just for somebody to kind of point you when your mind gets a little bit stuck.
Mm.
Okay, we're getting a little bit more action in the chat here. Let's see. Dano Les says, "Do you guys have tips implementing spirituality without obsessing about it?" I tend to. Well, I mean, what's the problem with obsessing about it? I
Yeah,
mean,
I think there's a problem if you start obsessing about it in concepts and in thoughts.
yes,
If you make it a big thing out of it and you start, oh, maybe it's this, and it, you know, it's
yeah,
such a big thing, and then if you start obsessing about practice, that's amazing. I think
yeah,
I think
yeah, exactly.
there's nothing better
And
than obsessing about this moment, or yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And even though, like, I do feel that even getting obsessed intellectually is not a bad starting point, because that's kind of what can drive you into practice more. Like, that's how it went for me. Was the more I listened to people talking about these kind of like experiences, like talking about no self, non-duality, and they were talking about something, and then I would listen to Sam Harris and Adyashanti, and I would listen also to conversations between, like, do you know Bernardo Castro?
No.
He's like this. He's more like a philosopher, whatever. But anyways, they would have these conversations, and like some people were like, "Yeah, but I can experience what you're talking about." Like they would talk about this like kind of oneness experience or something. And listening to all of this stuff, it was like eventually I was like, "But here's the thing. This is what's key: is that then you shift it over." Because eventually I was like, I'm never going to understand what they're talking about conceptually.
Mm.
Like I'm never going to think my way to this. And then that drove me, like, I have to just go deeper and deeper and deeper into this moment through sitting, because that's the only way to realize this.
Mm.
So obsession and even FOMO, like Angelo once answered this in a Q&A with somebody. He was like, the person was like, yeah, I've got so much seeking and wanting to know what this awakening thing is and what are people experiencing. And Angelo is saying, instead of saying like, no, seeking is bad, like a way a lot of people talk about this, they'll be like, oh no, seeking is the problem. And sure, that's all true. But use that seeking as fuel for inquiry. Like
Mm.
like Angelo actually said, yeah, it's great to hear that you're having this seeking. Actually put that to use. Who am I? Because otherwise, inquiry is kind of dull. You know, if you just sit there like, who am I? Who am I? Oh, you know, like it does nothing, right? It's really all about what's behind it. So, um, yeah, the mind will often say like, oh, maybe I'm obsessing too much or this or that, but that's generally just an interpretation. Um, Okay, IGH 1988 says, I'm doing a lot of self inquiry and have blinding levels of connection. Then my ego takes back over around specifically constant reinfection with COVID and functional capacity declining each time. Any tips on trusting the body in this process? Thanks. Um, First thing that comes to mind is just noticing that it's very natural as we do a lot of inquiry for like fear to surface and or like difficult experiences in the body. And what happens when something challenging to experience comes up, like fear, we bounce back into the thoughts immediately, like into the narrative and into the reflection. So when that starts to happen, like say a fear of reinfection and functional capacity, you really, it's fine, but you really actually want to notice, what is that actually about? Why am I all of a sudden thinking about reinfection? It's because it's fear in the body, and that's part of, like, that's one of the things that fear is tied to. It's like that narrative. So you can actually just use that to touch into some fear, because that's important, right? If you're doing inquiry and fear is coming up, then fear needs to be uh, addressed, right? And but the thing is, if we stay on the narrative level, then we can get so lost, right? You can be start thinking about, you know, why COVID is going to mess you up and what this means for this and what that means for that. And that's fine. But if we're, that's why I say it's so helpful to set a timer or something, because you can just be like, this moment is for inquiry and diving into experience, not for intellectual kind of analysis, right? Again, it's okay for thoughts to come up, but you want to then just, you want to inquire into that as opposed to um, just thinking, actively thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the person says, to clarify, I am getting COVID a lot, so not an unfounded fear.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I would still say that, like, that's why setting, for me, this was always helpful. It's like when I sat to meditate or inquire, to be like, this is time for meditation or inquiry, and that whatever story comes up, it's not the time to delve into story. Like, sure, we can notice story. So I wouldn't say it really matters if you're getting COVID a lot. Like, sure, that fear is understandable, and allow yourself to feel that fear. Like, that's what's key, is when the fear comes up, it's okay. Feel the fear. Actually say to yourself, I'm allowed to feel fear. I'm allowed to be afraid of this. But what is the experience actually? And then once you really get to the root of that, the story stops being a problem, right? Because the story was attached to the fear, and when we're unable to feel the fear, which is natural, then we're going to stay on the story. We're going to kind of play with the story. So yeah, I guess that's what I would say. Anything to add?
Mm, I think it's a good place to surrender
Mm,
if you say you're into self inquiry, and so it's not only your goal is not only to recover, I assume, because of your interest in this, and then um, for me always the fear of things happening in my life, like getting COVID reinfection, has always been like such a good thing to just surrender. Like,
yeah.
maybe if you get it all the time, it's like, yeah, who's even trying to avoid it, trying all these things, having all these thoughts like, maybe if I do this I won't catch it, and maybe if I
Mm,
had done this then I wouldn't have catched it. And that's for me, to take it on deeper on that side, it would just like inquire into that, like, what is my influence here? Do I have any control? Then
yeah.
I just
Yeah.
surrender.
What's yeah. Yeah. Surrender is such, especially when things feel challenging, right? Like when it feels like I don't know what to do.
Mm.
That's that's what it's like. Surrender doesn't happen when things feel good. Like, I find that whenever I feel like I'm in a really challenging, when things feel really challenged experientially, it's like, oh, this is when surrender happens. It's like life will put you in the situation to allow surrender to happen, but you can't really. I mean, you can be willing to surrender, but then the circumstances will arise where surrender can happen.
Mm.
Like when you don't know what to do, it's like, what if I can't stop myself from getting infected? Like, what if I just
Mm.
can't do that? And that will show you though what is underneath that. It's like, whoa, now there's a fear of being out of control and not being able to control my experience. And then you see what is really going on. But
Mm.
again, you can't really force this in the sense of avoiding, like, it's so easily we can be like, oh, okay, I want to just surrender. But that's still staying on the surface level, if that makes sense. Like, I've had that so many times where the mind was just like, oh, okay, I'll surrender. But that was rather than feeling what was here. It was
Mm.
like, the only reason I'm saying all of that in my thoughts is to try and find some other negotiation with reality. It's like, oh, if I surrender, do I still have to feel this? But sometimes that's all you can do, is
Yeah.
just be open to surrender. Um, okay, Flux says, hey guys, listening in and would like to hear you guys speak on the distraction processes and feeling of this is too much when dealing with symptoms, yet oftentimes the coping makes it worse. Do you want to start there, Matt?
Yeah. um for me, distraction processes is still um something I'm working with. Like, I tend
Mm,
to feel the urge to distract. I don't really have the feeling of this is too much anymore. For me, it's really, on that note, it's really helpful to be able to just see it as like, oh, this is just some doubt or fear about the situation,
mm,
and then just, okay, what's it what's on the other side, and for me,
mm.
that's now,
What's too much?
it's like a game, so,
Yeah.
but that takes time, but eventually I think you'll get there when I feel like this is too much, or then it's like, okay, let's go there.
Yeah.
Let's see what's too much, you know. And then the best thing is, again, sitting, eyes closed, and going towards what is too much, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Specifically, if we're talking distraction, it's like
Yeah.
the best thing you can do when that, like you said, that need to distract comes up is to stop and say, like, let's say it's a specific thing, like even addiction, like this can be helpful. Like, let's say we feel like we're compelled to go and do something. Like I've had this so much, like, oh, I just want to go, specifically before this whole endeavor, but like in the past, like, just pulled to go on your phone or go here, go do that, go do that. And it's like, what happens if I just stop and sit with this feeling, this urge to distract, and literally don't act on it, and just see how uncomfortable does it get. And the closer you get to the actual experience, the less. I mean, it can feel like it's getting more intense, but it's actually can become intensely enjoyable. But that's often further down the road. But when like there really is nothing to get away from, but
Mm.
it's so much habit. So that's why you have to just kind of take steps uh, like small steps can be so helpful. Like really just creates an entry point for yourself. This was what was helpful for me. It was like I actually went through a phase like after full recovery where um, I was just doing things again, and uh, then there was less kind of need to meditate because I was like, oh, whatever, I can do whatever I want. And then I got caught up in distraction again, and then what actually happened was there's this interesting trick the ego plays, or the way our mind thinks about things, where I was like, well, I used to be able to just sit and meditate for an hour, but now because I got into these distraction habit patterns again, I was like, I don't even want to sit. It's just I'll just keep distracting, right? So it's that hook, right? Just keep on taking the easy option. And to break myself out of that cycle, what I eventually did was just it was it was another kind of uh, lesson in humility, like in humbling my ego of like, yeah, you've lost the ability to kind of be good at meditating, basically. And I had to like swallow that pill and be like, okay, well, I can only sit for 5 minutes. But that's a big difference from just carrying on with the distraction cycle. Like that had to be my entry point back into this. Was like, okay, I have to let go of that part of my mind that's like, oh, I can meditate for 45 minutes, because that was too much of a barrier in the moment. So it was like, okay, I want to go and distract myself. But I realized that's what I'm doing. Like that's what you want to be honest with yourself as well. It's like I am like, what are my actual intentions here? Is it to get away from something? And when a part of me was like, yes, then I was like, okay, what if I just sat for 5 minutes? And then you can even go and do the distraction if you want. That's a good way to start this, is instead of being too hard on yourself, because I feel like it's so easy to fall into that trap of like self-judgment and setting the bar too high, where it's like, okay, no, I need to cut out this activity forever and just become super kind of mindful. It's like, well, they're like, no, you can still do that thing, but what would it be like to sit for 5 minutes before doing it and just feel into this feeling? And then over time you can start to push that more. You can be like, what would it be like to sit for 10 minutes? What would it be like to drop that activity today? But again, don't be too hard on yourself. Like, just enter this space. um, I see there's a second part to the question.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, oftentimes the coping makes it work. It's like we go far lengths to avoid and resist while simultaneously making things worse and the present reality never changing. It's always their way to be felt. Well, that's such a good point, because in the end, what you realize is you can't avoid anything. So it's like you said, like the harder you try to distract, the more uncomfortable it gets, because what's happening is you're just pushing harder on something that is concrete in a sense. Like it's not concrete when you explore it, but it's impossible to get away from anything, really. Like really anything without going to the core of it, right? So no matter how much we try and distract, it's going to get more and more comfortable. And actually, when we see that, that's a really helpful kind of way to stop the competing agendas, right? Again, often we have to see this enough times. Like that's how distraction played out for me, was going enough times down the distraction path and seeing how it never works out, right? It never was satisfying. Actually, I find, to each their own how they approach this, but for a while, allowing myself to act on all distractions was helpful because there's nothing left for the mind to imagine as a better state eventually, if that makes sense. But the challenge with this process is you could find yourself in very uncomfortable states, which is what I did, where I was like, okay, I can fulfill every desire that I want. And once you do all of that, you're left with nowhere to turn except what's here. And by that point, it could be really uncomfortable. That was the experience for me. It's like the more I search for a desire to fulfill me, the more uncomfortable it gets until you're left with nothing left to do but surrender, really. Um, so that can be helpful depending on someone's personality, but I'll be warned, you will probably find yourself in a very uncomfortable place. But for some people, that's the only way to do this. Um, like for me, it was just like, that's again how the pull eventually goes, because you leave no stone left unturned, where it's like, okay, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really something I've been struggling with a lot in phases.
Yeah.
Like some phases, not at all, and I'm just engaging with life and fully every time something comes up, I just sit with it, and
Yeah.
then I slip back into like distraction again, and
Yeah.
it's yeah, it takes time as well, I think. So
It's a good point though, because what you can start to realize as we get more good at inquiring into those, especially like you said, those periods where distraction increases, it eventually I found becomes clear that there's something surfacing deep below, and you only become aware of it a little bit down the line. Like that's what happened every time for me. Every time I start to go back into one of those cycles, um, it was, and then like maybe a couple days later, some deep emotion comes to the surface. And it's like, oh, that's why I've been distracting myself more. But you don't even realize it at first. It's like almost the distraction surfaces first, and then eventually you come to what's underneath that, because that was the kind of the Velcroed response. Like when, especially with the shadow work, like after we've had a shift and now these things start to arise, they'll come with the old coping mechanisms on top of them. One way to talk about it. So even
it presents like the
now,
option, like
yeah, it was like, yeah, here, and also like, yeah, try it, see what happens. Then it's like, oh, okay, it doesn't work.
take a glass of wine, grab your phone.
Yeah, exactly, like all these things. And yeah, it's very interesting though when you start to see why the distraction tendencies come up. It's like, because like you said, sometimes things just flow, and then suddenly all you want to do is resist and distract, and it's like, what is going on? And then eventually you see it, and like now I can see it almost the other way around, because it's things have clarified enough where some deep like trigger happens, or just something that like somebody says that is like, oh wow, this actually triggers a deep emotion, and then it's like, then you see the distraction patterns coming up as well. But I guess for me now, I've gone down that road enough times that it's just like so dissatisfying. It's like, and it's so satisfying. It actually becomes really enjoyable eventually when you die into the discomfort. Like really, it is. It's like a shift from a numbed reality to aliveness, but you have to go through like the frustration. Like often there's frustration often I'll talk with people about doing the emotion work, and they'll be like, I can't feel the emotions, I just feel numbness, I just feel so distant. And it's like, actually what's happening is there's like a layer of frustration on top, and that's just as much an emotional experience, but uh, we can easily get caught up in frustration. So I feel like frustration is a big one to be aware of, and then that will often come up first. Yeah.
So do you have some tips besides like taking time to sit when you feel, to make that switch of like having a constant squirmy anxiety to enjoying the deep like aliveness of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
sky?
yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, Really just getting closer and closer and closer to the raw physical thing. That's what becomes more enjoyable. And really for me, I found like quite uh, like really even pushing yourself into the physical. One way to put it, like play with this, right? Because obviously there's nuances to it. But I've often noticed like I'll be sitting to meditate and maybe there's a lot going on in the body and it's quite easy to stay up on a mind level without even realizing it. And then this is where I found the Vipassana retreats actually quite helpful because there's so much emphasis on body scanning of sensation that I would I'd learned that it is inherently uncomfortable to stay with sensation without referencing back to the mind early on. It's like really feels torturous, kind of. But the more you like push into that, often I found that like quite a pushy approach can actually be helpful. It's funny because I found how often the mind wants to um, like make meditation inherently peaceful and like I need to stay in a calm state of mind, whereas actually quite a strong inquiry into sensation and can I stay with sensation and not grab onto a thought? Um, yeah, and then just keep like driving into that. And at the same time, that's why I say it's a nuance because we can like you don't want to fixate on either. Like we can start straining too much, trying to make something happen. So then kind of releasing periodically as well, if that makes sense. So like, can I really force myself into physical sensation at a deeper level without thinking about it, and then stay with that. Notice when I'm going into the thought, stay with the sensation, and then also just okay, what if I just like allow sensation to be exactly as it is? I feel like kind of mixing that approach can be helpful. Yeah,
Nice, good stuff.
yeah, yeah, and just like just being aware of thoughts is so much of it. Like
Mm.
when we're feeling frustration, if we can just keep on noticing that that's a thought, that's another thought, and the more we practice that, we can really start to get underneath it. But you know, we it's so addictive to keep stay on the thought level. So yeah,
Yeah, and it's like this whole process is so paradoxical because for me, what also helps is to whenever I have something like I'm suffering, then I try to kind of split it between what do I feel and what are the thoughts, you know.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
then that makes it really such a question makes it really easy to feel into the body and just feel like doubt or fear or I don't know.
yeah,
And yeah, I think eventually when I hear you talk about non-duality, you know, everything is just one. But
mm,
in this phase, I think it can be good to separate
yeah,
those. Like,
yeah, yeah. I think that's a good point. Like because it depends really what's coming up, but often like I've noticed phases where just allowing the like thinking to happen was helpful as well because there was too much resistance to thoughts, you know. So
mm,
like really focusing on the body and then just really struggling with that. And then just like, okay, what if I just allow attention to be in thought and acknowledge the thoughts? Like, okay, what's the next thought coming up? And then touching in with the body. And yeah, eventually the kind of borders start blurring. Um, but I mean, even so, I find like you can still clarify each sense on its own. You know, you can still touch into okay, what's the physical? Okay, what's the sound? What's the
mm,
and then yeah, later on, it's quite fun to play with both at the same time. Maybe like
like the
well, like
sensation of
that.
thought.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like that's a great entry point. And then even like what is the like it gets really interesting, but like while you're looking like realizing that the sound is happening in the same place as the visual field
Mm,
like it's so easy the mind turns it into the reflection into thought, right? So you're hearing something and then you're imagining where it is coming from but there's so much filtering going on there. Whereas what you can start to play with is like looking at the visual field and then just noticing that the sounds are happening. It's not happening somewhere else.
Mm.
It's literally there's nowhere else. Like this experience right now, where you're looking, that is the same place where the sounds are happening. It's just a different texture. But this is really like late stage stuff. Like I've only started playing with this, and it's only sort of clarifying with me like recently after years of this kind of inquiry. But it is so yeah. It's just for somebody that makes no sense to. It's absolutely fine. Just clarify. Often the thought level is the best place to start, because if we feel like we don't have access to the body, if we don't have access to anything else, then do inquiry, like do self inquiry, and that's often what breaks open the door for other practices. But yeah, even that the practice, like you said, this will actually really open the door for more curious practices. That like what we were talking about before the live, like just sitting in being and letting that deepen and letting that deepen, and then notice when it starts to get stirred up, and then just keep on. Like Angelo calls it resting in unbound consciousness, and I found that so helpful because I was trying a lot of the non-dual inquiries, and there was too much like struggle. It felt like the mind was trying to make something happen, and then on one of Angelo's retreats, he kind of clarified that resting in just this being experience does just dissolve a lot. And then later, like you keep coming back to that, and then we'll get stirred up, and then you keep on just noticing it and deepening it and inquiring into it, and then resting in it. And then at some point, there's just less barriers to the other inquiries. It's like that kind of consciousness practice releases things, dissolves things. So yeah, when we have access to that, it's really helpful. Okay. MK Ocean says, how often do you meditate and for how long? I'm sure it's individual, but just curious. Yeah, that's a fun question. Well, Matt, you were saying, what's your schedule like now?
Now it's 30 minutes in the morning. Like I just wake up, glass of water, and sit for 30 minutes. Like I'm not sleepy when I wake up, so if that's a problem, you can do something before that. But like
Yeah.
it's way better for me if I meditate before I check my phone or anything. Like it's like
Yeah.
clear, it's so much clearer. And then I do 30 minutes in the evening, and then depending during the day, it depends on my schedule, but usually like one 10 minute, and if I have more time, more. But
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It fluctuates so much for me nowadays because I don't know why, but it does. I do a bunch of like varying between 10, 20, 30-minute sessions. Sometimes sometimes I don't even use the time anymore. I just sit there and just sit. But I, it really depends on what stage you're at. Like I had a phase where I was meditating like 3 hours a day for like a month. And that was a really important phase for me. And then it just now becomes like, there's a lot of integration work to do, right? So sometimes I'm quite comfortable meditating a lot and it's important, but I also just have to go with the engagement of life as well, because I can see when I would kind of just try to disengage from life through meditation. So I wouldn't worry too much about this. Like I think meditation is always going to be helpful, and I do think like meditating even a couple of hours a day is always helpful. But I've had days where I just want to sit and meditate the whole day, and there's things happening in my life that I should probably be attending to, and I use meditation to try and avoid that. That's more further down the line, but that's why I just say like the amount you need to do daily can fluctuate really. I had periods where I was doing a couple of hours a day, and then nowadays I probably still average like an hour a day. 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, 20 minutes here. And it is if I just feel myself in a distracted mood, like I just don't have anything specifically to do, like I'm not going to record a video, I'm not going to answer some emails, and I can see myself on my laptop, like looking for something to do, then actually setting time and going to sit and meditate is often just the best thing to do, because it's like, why do I need to do something else? So yeah, it eventually becomes quite intuitive. Like you go with the kind of the flow of your circumstances. But I do think daily practice, like Matt and I have spoken a little bit about it already, it's so helpful to have, and have a schedule as well. Actually, like I find that really helpful as well. Like to just have, like, kind of how Matt said he's doing it now, like 2 sessions a day for a decent amount of time, and you just commit to that. It's going to serve you massively in the long run. Like if you can dedicate an hour a day to self-inquiry, at some point things will start shifting. Like there's no doubt. So yeah, and no matter what the day feels like, it's still useful. Like that's such a helpful thing to overcome as well. It's like the mind saying, "Oh, but today I'm just not feeling clear, so I'm not going to do it," or something. Like just knuckling down in any case is always helpful, and often that's the most important days. So okay, Johannes with a nice members badge. That's so cool. I've been he says, thank you, you're welcome. I've been doing a lot of emotion work the past months. When I go into a strong fear sensation that is quite prominent in the chest area, I can notice that I quickly bounce back into thought, and I can't quite seem to bridge the distance resistance to it. Well, like that's great. Like that's exactly how it starts. The more that you can notice that tendency to bounce back into thought, just notice that, and then just see if you can gently redirect your attention back to, what am I trying to get away from? Yeah, you don't really need to bridge anything, but you can just keep using inquiry to ask yourself, where am I holding distance? Like that's always a helpful inquiry for me is, yeah, am I holding distance? What am I holding distance from? And what if I can just keep touching into that? Yeah, and it's very natural. Like that bounce back is completely, it's very quick, and it's got a lot of momentum to it, and it's nothing wrong that you're doing. But the more that you can be aware of it, that's the first step, and then you just keep inquiring, and it will get easier. You can maybe stay with it 1 second longer, half a second longer, and the next time you stay with it a little bit longer. So don't set your expectations too high, but also don't like just give in to the bounce back. Somewhere in between is what I would say.
Yeah, I think Angelo uploaded like a video 1 or 2 weeks ago, named, or maybe a bit longer. Yeah, maybe a month ago. Named, it's called The Ocean of Sensation, I think, which is really good to point you into like the emotions, the senses in the body.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I recommend that one.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like I've so many times just watching one of Angelo's pointers just simplified things so much for me. Where it was like, especially when there's a lot of struggle arising, like there's so many times where I've been getting like frustrated or annoyed or something, and then I'm just like, what's it all about? And but a pointer can be really helpful to show you where you're getting stuck. The ocean of sensation. I don't know if I heard that. Okay, Vlog said, thank you. I relate to that. Lots of in and out of cycles of distraction and realization. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust me, dude, it's very much part of the process. And the more that you can see that it's not you, right? It's not you that is choosing to distract, it's distraction patterns arising. And then we have the opportunity to, yeah, we don't have to act out on them 24/7. That there is kind of a choice there, that when the distractions arises, do I go with it unconsciously? Do I go with it slightly consciously? Like these are kind of the phases, right? Where we just lie to ourselves and pretend we're not distracting, but we actually are, but we're not being authentic. Or we know we're distracting, but we still do it. That's to say the next phase. Or we start to see, okay, distraction is arising. It's a strong pull to distract, but I'm going to make a different choice. And then maybe at some point again we get back into distraction. That's still fine. and then just less and less of unconsciously distracting ourselves. But the distraction has to surface up. So it's so easy for the mind to turn it into a personal thing. Like, I'm distracting myself so much. Whereas when you just realize that distraction is a very natural part of the process, it just helps a lot. Yeah.
Yakut's question. I got long COVID since 9 months, and it gets better slowly. I also got a derealization since 8 years, 24/7. I think your approach works too for that, also for panic attacks. Sounds good. Yeah, I believe certainly it helps with those. I mean, for derealization, I know someone for whom it really helps. Like
Mhm.
online, I just saw like a video of a guy explaining like how he got out of this, because I also had derealization in the beginning of long
Yeah.
COVID, and um, yeah, it's it's all tied to the nervous system.
Yeah, exactly. And specifically, like, disassociation and derealization is very much tied to too much identity and thoughts, because then things can just, I mean, I had that. I had phases where I literally felt like I was losing my mind. Like, I thought my thoughts were saying like I'm going crazy, and then I started like researching stuff about like psychosis and when there's so much trapped in the system, and but we're on the thought level, it can be pretty scary because you're just in a reflection of the fear. So like, fear is coming up, and then we're so disassociated that we're just reflecting on a reflection, and then it can really spiral into scary places in the mind. Um, so specifically for things like derealization stuff, I think grounding is very helpful. Like, bring yourself back to the physical, like, because, and it can take some practice, absolutely, but like, the thoughts are a reflection of an experience, and the more that you can ground back into the experience, that you don't need to keep referring to those thoughts. Like, again, this takes a lot of work, but derealization, disassociation, like, we're all actually disassociated and delusional until we start to break free from our minds. Like, and there's varying degrees of this. Like, obviously, some people are on an even deeper spectrum of that. But again, it's okay. But I would just look into specifically more kind of a physical, tangible thing to put your attention on. Like, um, do some stretching, maybe. I don't know. Like, grounding is really helpful just to get you out of the mental space, because not that you need to get out of it, but you need to get out of the belief that what your mind is saying is true, and that can be destabilizing in itself. You know, that's the thing. Yeah. And deep breathing, right? I find that so helpful for whatever, like, anxiety or even resistance. Like, we shift into a shallower state of breathing whenever there's resistance. So forcing myself to take deeper breaths, like right into the belly. There's often a lot of resistance. Like, I'm often surprised. Like, I can feel like I'm actually having a good meditation. Like, I can sit there and I can feel like I'm quite peaceful, but I'm staying on such a surface level. And when I try to take a couple of deep breaths, there's a lot of resistance. There's like, oh, I want to not breathe deeply. And it's like, wait, why don't I want to breathe deeply? And I found that's really helpful for like anxiety, those kind of things. Just force yourself to take a couple of deeper breaths and stay with it, and stay with the discomfort. And that's, force yourself back into that, and you can, it's grounding as well. Yeah. All right. Track says, good to see such smiling faces from you both. I'm glad the smiles are appreciated. Nina says, I'm new here. Great call. Welcome, Nina. Nice to have you joining in. Wood says, how did recovery look like? Did symptoms die down over time, or was it just a redefinition and coping of symptoms that you still live with today? I would say it starts with the redefinition of symptoms. that's what it was for me. I really made a project out of dissolving resistance to my symptoms. Like it really clicked on me at a deep level that that's what I needed to do. That this whole project was about trying to get rid of something, and that fundamental need to get rid was what was driving the process as well. So really making a project out of turning my symptoms from objects and problems into objects to actually allow and to give love to, and to it's challenging, there's going to be friction there, but for me that was a really important part of the process. Was like, I'm not going to stop seeing this as a problem and allow myself to go into it, and then the symptoms really do dissolve into a different kind of experience. Like this is kind of what I was touching on earlier with Matt, where the the things you were running from actually become really quite enjoyable. Like this kind of feeling in the body that was always too intense, the more I could rest in that throughout the day, like force myself into that experience, it's like, wow, this is actually intensely enjoyable, but there's not a lot of space for a separate individual. That's the key. That's why intense physical experiences are there's so much resistance to them, because they threaten the one who is controlling, right? There's not much space for the reflection anymore. It's like why, I notice it a lot with being at home and all of that. Like when there's like really loud noises, it really, if there's still resistance in the system, it's very annoying, right? Like you see this in all humans. Like if the dog is barking incessantly, it starts to make people annoyed. And it's like what's happening there is you're getting such a strong taste of the thing that you've gotten used to resisting, like the raw sensation experience, and it's inherently uncomfortable when we're holding distance from it. So I'd say that's what happened for me over time. But this is really deeper stage stuff, right? So sometimes they calm down with like meditation and all of that. But later on, it was realizing like, oh, all of these things that I was referring to as symptoms eventually just become this raw physical experience. But that is quite deep. So yeah. Don't know what it was for Matt.
Yeah, very well said, I think. Often people asking these questions, there's a lot of doubt about if the symptoms will go away, and I mean, I think we can say they will go away, but
Yeah.
that won't satisfy the doubt probably. So
Yeah.
investigate the doubt and investigate, yeah, what if they don't go away?
Yeah, exactly.
What comes up when you inquire into that, like
because they really, it's really key. Like they don't go away from that place of wanting them to go away. Like that's what's really key. They go away for me from the pure acceptance of them. Yeah, and as we stop kind of going down behaviors and patterns that we know are not helpful, like I feel like that's an important first step. Was for me was like kind of calming things down enough just so that I wasn't kind of in these boom crash cycles 24/7, and I was doing the stuff I knew I needed to do, and then things calmed down, because it's like, okay, every time I was going to go down the cycle that would lead me in this horrible, overwhelmed state, I'm actually going to sit and explore what's here. And that small decision in the long run, that's how things settle down. Because, and then the integration is like, okay, now where can I push, and then when is it going to be too much, and like that's more. It's very different for different people. Like some people are doing the integration at the same time just because of life circumstances, so that's fine. But I do find that's another aspect of it, is like, can I see what behaviors are just not serving me and replace that with like investigation, and that can be really powerful. All right. Johannes, you talked about the sense that thought is just a reflection in one of the last live streams, and it makes so much sense. Why obsess about the thought so much when you can be with the real thing below? Yeah, that's a really good point. And when that when that clicks, it's a great opportunity, like you said, to really be like, wait, what is exactly the thought's all about? And things become so simple. Like when that really clicks, it's like it doesn't matter what the thoughts are saying. Like it literally doesn't matter what the thoughts are saying. Like it's such a relief. It's such a simplification, but you have to go into the discomfort still. But you realize that that's all you really need to do is just stay with this discomfort. And then anything overcomplicating and saying like, "Oh, this is too much," or is this going to be dangerous? Is this going to be that? You realize that's still a reflection. That's not just a reflection of some fear. That's a reflection of the fear sensation. So often we have to start in the thought sense, and kind of if that's where we're at, that's where we're at. That's absolutely fine. Thoughts are not a problem. You can use thoughts as your entry point, really. But when this kind of clarifies the way Johannes is saying, where you can see that there's something that the thoughts are reflecting, there's something that the thoughts are a reaction to, it's a really great simplification because you can just keep on touching into that. And sometimes the mind will be busier, right? Specifically when there's something uncomfortable coming up, it will feel there's more pull into the thoughts, and we will feel like maybe we need to analyze this. Maybe that pull into kind of the thought space is stronger, and that's fine still. But if we just keep investigating, there will still be something physical that it's a reflection of. So it really becomes so simple. It's just like stay with the sensations. That's it. Yeah.
So good.
Nice. I also get a sense of gratitude for the thoughts because they sort of try to point out how the sensations might relate to my life. If that makes sense. Yeah, the thing is, I don't know if I know exactly what you're talking about, but like once we kind of disidentify from thought as being the only possible experience, then thought can actually be useful. It can be a useful tool as long as it's not the only thing we're seeing, and as long as we see that it's just a reflection. But it can be a useful tool, as you said. It can use it to identify what is this in relation to. Sometimes there's no need to do that, but sometimes it can be helpful. Maybe there is something we need to address on the relative level, like a relationship, or like whatever, something in relationship to another, or something here, something there. And if that doesn't feel the case, then you just feel it. Like, yeah. So, yeah, thoughts can just be. I was actually talking with Josh today about this, and it's like thoughts and the mind is a great helper, but we're used to using it as the boss, right? Like thinking that thought is all there is and the mind is all there is, and then there's everything else, where it's like there's everything else, and then there's a kind of slight reflection that is the sense of self, and that is the me, and that is the thinking thing. And it's actually just like an after effect, but it can be useful, right? It's not to deny that it can be useful for creativity, for whatever, but you just realize that it's like a very kind of, it's just a reflection mechanism, basically, which can get quite interesting. It's quite incredible, actually, how much we're able to do with language. Like I've been reflecting on that recently, and it's like we're able to create these whole complex worlds that we get lost in with this, like this expression is quite remarkable, really, eventually. And actually, like I feel like we can explore, like that's the cool thing with pointing, is then we can use the language to kind of break us out of the addiction to the language world as well. Like that's what's really incredible with people that are good at pointing, and you get a deeper appreciation of this deeper it goes. Like the more I listen to Angelo's pointers, I'm like, wow, it's actually very clear what he's doing, And it's quite cool, like how you can use language in a different way to like point past language in a sense. Yeah, awesome. It's always interesting to go deeper. Okay, Matt, do you want to take that one?
I have a somewhat sensitive question: how to deal with the darker thoughts that arise from the physical symptoms. Dark. Kind of made peace with whatever, surrendered. But it, the experience gets really intense, and the thoughts. And um, when I was experiencing those phases, I wasn't aware of like pointing out thoughts at all. Like I was just completely mind identified. So I think you have a head start there compared to me, because um, yeah, you essentially you're pointing out that it's just a thought, and it's covering up a really intense physical symptom or sensation, um, and often the physical sensation is triggered by a thought. In my case, so when I was at my worst, I had I had a lot of physical sensations, but then I would have a thought like this will stay forever, and that would trigger very intense physical sensations, not the symptoms per se, but fear mostly.
Mm.
And then that would cause me to think about the future and about my life and what's going to happen, and would spiral like out of hand. And that's, if you can see this, then and it will take time, you can separate it, kind of, I would say. So you have the symptoms, and then you have a thought about a symptom, which will trigger a lot of fear, which will trigger thoughts about, like, it can get suicidal and it can get very hopeless. But that's just it's built on, it's a thought to cover up the fear, and the fear is created by a thought about the symptom. It's like a whole chain. um,
Mm.
and yeah, sitting with the symptom, sitting with the fear, is where I would go,
Yeah,
and have some compassion, because
yeah,
it's tough.
yeah. It's especially. Um, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely just seeing the suicidal thoughts, like noticing, like that's the as intense as the mind can make it. Basically, it will bring up like all of the thoughts you're most afraid of, and it will really challenge your ability to say like that's just a thought, and it's okay. Like you don't want to try to bypass the feeling like that. Like that's a subtle thing that we can do. Is we're like that's just a thought, like, but there's a really intense feeling associated with it, and it's okay. And it's okay if it's scary. And yeah, like Matt said, the compassion is really helpful here because of how intense it is, right? You really just want to be like, hey, it's okay. Like this thought can be here, and it's okay that I'm afraid of this thought as well. and this intense sensation can be here. And to be honest, what was really helpful for me, because I also had this phase where like every single day my thoughts were like, yeah, this is too much. I don't want to spend another day in this experience, and can't I just stop existing, and suicidal thoughts and all that. And just for me, like a practical thing that really helped was just like actually putting my foot down with thoughts. Like I don't know, this can sound confusing, but I'll try to explain it. Where I was just like, okay, I'm not gonna commit suicide. Like I just knew that. Like I don't know what the difference is between because here's the thing is like often we can feel the thoughts, but if we're not actually going to do something, like we're it's we can just see how it's a distraction. Like for me, it was like I just know like I'm not going to take that step. So when those thoughts come up, I can just not feel them, right? Whereas like otherwise, like the thoughts would come up and it would be like, this is too much. I just don't want to exist anymore. And it's like an addictive mind road to avoid feeling something. And then when I'm just like, I'm not going to do anything, then it's like the mind road just stops making sense. It's like, sure, the mind road can be there, but then you don't feel it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like, that's part of how we can cut ties is it's like, okay, these really intense experiences can be coming up, these really intense thoughts can be coming up, and you don't need to get rid of the thoughts, right? You don't need to tell yourself, hey, I'm bad for having these thoughts, like this really dark thoughts. They can be there, but you can just be like, I'm not going to, like, if I know that I'm not going to take those steps, then the thought can still be triggering, but you can just be like, okay, that's just resistance. Like you can see it for what it is. It's like, that is the resistance playing out. If I'm not going to take those steps, then I can just see that that is resistance. I never would either. I think it is the thinking mind's way of trying to get some sense of control in the situation. Yes, exactly. All makes sense. Thank you for answering me, Zach. It's exactly that. It's like you said. And when you take away that ability to control, you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to do anything now. The mind has like no triggers left to pull, really, because that's eventually what it feels like. And it feels like helplessness, because that's the ultimate act of avoidance. If we say, I don't have enough experience to talk about this, but I heard somebody else talk about kind of suicide in this sense, and it was like, and I can just speak from my own experience, like that's what it would have felt like, is the ultimate act of avoidance, where it's like the mind's last choice to say, like, I have a choice to get out of this. And it's like, if we're not going to do that, then you're left in this helpless feeling of, I have to feel what's here. And that's so intense that the mind is producing these really dark thoughts, but I'm not going to act on those thoughts. So there's just like this helplessness, right? There's this really kind of nowhere to go. And yeah, like have compassion for yourself. Like it's a challenging space, but it doesn't stay like that forever. And it is, like I said, eventually that space is quite enjoyable, but there is a lot of resistance initially. Yeah, it really is. It really is the ultimate act of avoidance. It's like it's the mind trying to cling to any way to get out. Like I'm still in control. I can control not feeling this, and it's like we'll do it at any cost, basically. So yeah, I'm glad that it landed there. And I think it's helpful to talk about that stuff because I think it is a mechanism. Like it is these are the types of thoughts that the mind will produce when things get intense, but they will feel like taboo thoughts. Like, oh, I can't talk about how dark the thoughts are actually getting because it's just too dark. And it can be really helpful to break that kind of shame a little bit, like around my thoughts, and just realize that that's what the mind does. Like that is the thought producing machine. It will increase the kind of intensity of the thoughts and the material of the thoughts. The closer we get to really letting go, the closer we get into the uncomfortable spaces, the mind will pull the thoughts that really feel too much. And to realize that it's not you thinking these suicidal thoughts. It's avoidance, it's resistance, it's the mechanism of resistance. So you're off the hook, but you just want to see that. All right. Maybe we should leave it there.
Yeah, good one.
Good one. Do you want to do? Should we do a 5 minute meditation, or do you want to go?
Yeah, I would like to do meditation.
Okay, cool. I'll just set a quick timer, and we can do a silent one. Do it on my watch.
Yes, I agree. MK Ocean. It's good to bring everything up,
Yeah,
everything you're struggling with that relates to this, and as you see, someone brings something up that others maybe don't feel like bringing up, but it can relate to others, and this discussion is helpful, I think.
yeah, exactly. It's a great sense of vulnerability to be willing to talk about these experiences. Um, it is brave, and it's yeah, it will feel vulnerable, and that's good. If you can keep on orienting towards vulnerability in all areas of life, how can I be more vulnerable? How can I have less protection? Like, the mind holding distance, keeping safe. How can I just be vulnerable, not know will serve you? Okay, let's do 8 minutes. You want 8 minutes, Matt?
I'm fine with whatever.
Okay, let's do 10 then.
Yeah.
10 minutes. Okay, starting now. Right, no. There we go. Righty, enjoy everyone. All right. My stream disconnected, so I opened my eyes and the whole stream was gone.
During I heard like there was constant like a white noise, and then it stopped, and then I was like, I think that was when it disconnected.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Actually, I could resume it, but then I went onto my laptop because I had the stream open here, and I was like, okay, Matt's still there. I could see like you were still alive, so I was like, okay, the stream's still there. How do I get back on? But I was like, shit, everyone's gonna be meditating. Like if I can't get back on, it's gonna be an endless meditation.
That was a good one. Thanks for all the questions, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Sam, hello, welcome. It's a bit late, but thanks for showing your face. We still appreciate it. All right, cool. Thanks, Matt. Thank you for joining.
I loved it.
Good, good. All right, we'll see you all next time.
Yeah, hope to see you next time.
Good luck, everyone. You got this.
Bye bye.
Don't
Good
believe
luck.
the mind. Don't believe the doubts. Okay. Bye. In stream.